A letter which was sent to him and which was simply written, Khushwant Singh, bastard India.
Quality which you get here, the quality of audience which you get here, cannot be matched in any part of the country.
KSLitFest. Last year I was here to launch my book celebrating a very special woman in my life.
It is believed that really, really good sex meant that the marriage would be stable. If the marriage was stable, society would be stable. And if society was stable, the kingdom would be stable.
Jaffi there, I think has been much talked about. Do you regret having done what you did?
My Jaffi was no conspiracy, it was no Raphael deal. Good Lord.
What I can say is it's been stimulating, it's been attentive, it's been large, and it's been very agreeable.
जहाँ हर धर्म के लोग अपने ईश्वर को रब के नाम से पुकारते हैं। इसी सरहद पे कल डूबा था सूरज, होके दो टुकड़े।
Hi everyone, welcome to the first digital Khushwant Singh Literary Festival. Before we go any further, I'd like to tell you a little bit, those who don't know about how the festival began. It began in a place called Kasauli, which is a military cantonment up in the Himalayas, small hill station, very clean, kept very clean by the military. It's 6,000 feet up, only an hour and a half's drive from Chandigarh. 9 years ago, we were holidaying there. My father has a holiday home there. He is too old to travel when we had the LitFest, but we decided, along with the brigadier who's then in charge, Anant Narayanan, who's now general, and he said, and we discussed it, why not have a literary festival in your father's name? So that's how the literary festival started in Kasauli, and we've had it for the next 8 years continuously. This year, even though the present brigadier Naveen Mahajan was very keen that we have it again in Kasauli, it's just not possible. So it's going to be a digital lit fest. Let me say a few words about the kind of themes that we've taken up at this LitFest, and they reflect some of the concerns and passions of my father. One was the education of the girl child. Number two, also equally important, and which is going to be talked about in this session, is the need to preserve the ecology and save the environment. This talk is always, and I'm sure it might come up, is environment versus development. This has been an issue, but I think both can go together. So these were two concerns, and of course, since it's in a military cantonment, the LitFest is dedicated to the Indian soldier. So that's all I wanted to say about the LitFest. I should also mention that we've had it for 2 years in London. Last 2 years, we've had it in London also, because London is where my father did his higher education at King's College, London University, where he got his law degree. So the King's College is very keen that we come to London and have the LitFest there, and we've done it for 2 years there. Now I'd like to introduce you to Indira Shekhar, who's been to all our LitFests. We call her Indy for short. So she will take it from here.
Thank you, Rahul. Well, I have to say it's a great joy always to be part of the Khushwant Literature Festival in whatever form, real or digital. It reflects very much the spirit of your father, Rahul. It reflects very much his great iconic literary contributions, his wonderful visionary editorial skills, and his great sense of fun. And these are all things I learnt about him through the festival, since I'd never had the privilege of knowing him. And I think you and Niloufar have done just a wonderful job of recreating that very spirit in this festival. We always have the advantage, those of us who come to the festival, to be able to look at intense global issues, at the way the world works, to access the most interesting literature, and to have the most fantastic, wonderful, fun-filled conversations. So I'm so happy to be part of this festival. Now, today's sessions have all been about new books that have come into the world. We started by thinking about the great injustices of how the pandemic has treated the underprivileged, the migrations in India. We went on to think about the pandemic in terms of the global issues of nations and how they interact with each other and position themselves in fighting the battle of this global pandemic that we are all living through. And one of the points that came out of the previous conversation was how we need to spend time, both as individuals and as nations, reflecting upon our place in the world in self-reflection. And that philosophical point, I think, somehow leads us directly into the session that's going to come. Although I haven't read the book yet, I believe that when someone walks all by themselves in solitude through the Himalayas, starting in Pakistan, 2,700 kilometers to Nepal, surely there are lots of moments for self-reflection. We have two remarkable gentlemen who are going to be in conversation, both of whom who have gone into the remote, into the wondrous places that the world offers us, that the earth offers us, that have not yet been overtaken by humanity and by development. And so they come from a place where they truly can speak about ecology and the environment. I will spend just a second and a half on each of them telling you who they are. Jono Lineen is the curator of the National Museum of Australia, creating a new permanent gallery on the environmental history of Australia. The gallery will look at the entire continent through the lens of the Anthropocene, that is the period of time during which human activities have impacted the environment. Erling Kagge, a true Renaissance man. He is an explorer, a publisher, an author, a lawyer. The list is endless. A Renaissance man, but who also spends a great deal of time in very remote places, the North Pole, the South Pole, climbing Mount Everest. Both of them just came back, well, before the session started, both of them just were talking about today's skiing experiences and today's return from the mountains to these digital spaces in which we are able to converse with them. I think the gods have, or the powers that be, the natures have heard us. It's raining here in Bangalore where I am. Erling Kagge was just saying that it was raining there in Norway where he is. Over to both of you.
Great. Thank you very much, Indy. Well, Erling, do you mind if I get started?
Please do.
Okay. So I thought that it was very interesting, when we were talking about this session, that there's quite a few similarities between Erling and my own life's trajectories. And for example, we're the same age. We both undertook major expeditions when we were in our late 20s, early 30s. And then we wrote books about the lessons from those expeditions many years after that, 15, 20 years after that. And we're both really engaged with the power of walking. Erling's most recent book is called Walking One Step at a Time, beautiful meditation on the power of walking. My most recent book is called Perfect Motion, How Walking Makes Us Wiser, looking at the evolutionary and creative history of walking. And we're both fascinated by the psychological space that quietude provides. Erling's, maybe his most famous book is Silence. The book that I'm working on right now is looking at a cultural history of breathing. So we both believe that there's something special about those quiet spaces, the spaces where you can move into yourself. And both of us are collectors in some ways. Erling is a collector of contemporary fine art, and I'm a curator at the National Museum of Australia. So I'm a professional collector. I collect objects related to social history. So I think looking at those similarities, there's some very interesting questions that we can throw back and forth to hopefully give the audience a bit of an idea about how we function in the world, and maybe eventually some ideas about how we've approached this particular very strange time on the planet. So maybe to start, I'd like to go back to the start and ask Erling about those first expeditions. Of course, you did expeditions prior to skiing to the poles and climbing Everest, but what do you remember about your first motivations to do things that other people hadn't done before?
First of all, I think, as you probably share some experience in the sense that we are all born explorers. So everybody who's listening here today, remember back in life, you were an explorer when you were born, and as soon as we learned how to walk, we walked out of the house, looked into the world, and started to wonder what was hidden between me and you and the horizon. And sometime later, we also want to see what was beyond the horizon, and we want to have more space around ourselves. So I think that's, in that sense, I think to be an explorer is not something it's not something you're becoming. It's something you kind of slowly stop doing. However, that spirit never goes to zero, I think. So we always have this spirit of exploration in us. And it's, for me, it was very much about being in nature, listening to nature, kind of, as Indira said, being a part of the rain, the wind, the oceans, listening to the birds, and doing something physical at the same time. But then in the 20s, I started to think about walking to the North Pole with my two pals, Børge Avsland and Geir Andby, and be the first to do it unsupported, and later be the first to walk alone to the South Pole. And of course, that has a very competitive edge, which is in one way pathetic when you talked about being in nature. But however, it started out sometime in my 20s.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, Erling, that I think Homo sapiens, we are explorers. We're driven to explore. You watch children taking those first steps. I remember, especially when my older son first started walking, it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, because he was given this challenge and he was going to achieve it. You could feel it. There was no way that he was going to stop until he was a bipedal traveler. And everybody has that in them, I think. But what you've done, of course, is something a little bit more. Doing things that other people haven't done requires a particular mindset and particular motivation. I know for myself, I look back on my expeditions in my 20s and early 30s, and I actually think that they were a little bit selfish. As a father now, I look at that and go, wow.
I think you're right. They were selfish, at least they were egocentric, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, once you have kids, things get a little bit different. And I think about the incredibly dangerous situations that I put myself in. And now I wonder, wow, when I hear about people doing those things, like Alex Honnold or somebody like that, I'm going, that is insane. But of course, yourself and I were doing those kind of things in our 20s. So there's an interesting progression there too. I know that you achieved the 3 poles there by your early 30s, and then your life took a different direction. I was similar, after I did that very long trek through the Himalayas, I was ready for something else. So maybe can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, how things change after you achieve big goals like that?
Yeah, I think that's I've been thinking kind of the same ideas as you have. Obviously, the reason you walk to the South Pole alone is truly egocentric. But then again, to my very positive surprise, when I came home, I started to see that expedition meant so much for so many other people, especially Norwegians, but also outside Norway, and that became a new inspiration that I actually understood that my expeditions can be something for the common good. And that was a great experience because, of course, if you're going to have a meaningful life, you need to try to make, everybody should try to change the world for the better. And of course, everybody can change the world, like, in small parts. As you say in Norwegian, we say, even a mouse can eat an elephant if you take, small portions. So, so that taught me a great lesson. And that's also one of the reasons I'm writing books, because write articles and talk about it is because I think like today, like Rahul and Indira also talked about, this importance also to connect to nature. And of course, for you and for me and many others, I think we have a responsibility today to talk about, the richness about being a part of nature. And also, I think one of the origins of many of the problems we have today in terms of loneliness, restlessness, even depression is due to the fact that, we almost only relate to man-made culture, man-made devices. And so I think, to talk about nature and the beauty of nature and the importance of listening to Mother Earth, it's 4.5 billion years old. So to me, it's super naive not to listen to Mother Earth, because after all, Mother Earth is, telling us quite a lot about what's going to happen in the future too.
Yes, absolutely. There's so many lessons to learn there. My first career was actually as a forester in Canada. So I spent 18 years working in forestry in the subarctic, and I'll never, those times are really etched in my mind, because we were really, the main purpose of the job was replanting trees. And so I spent 18 years, I like to say, with my hand inside Mother Earth, planting these trees. And I actually feel, I feel a little bit sad for people who haven't had that experience with nature. I think about people living in large cities, and, a lot of people in India, of course, don't have the opportunity to get out into wilderness areas, or even into local parks, in some instances. So what do you think about that, Erling? What are your recommendations for people, living in a massive country like India? How can we help them get in contact with nature and get in touch with that energy that we really need to sustain ourselves?
Ooh, I really wish I had one really good answer. Life is difficult, and if you're in Bangalore, in the middle of a big city, it's even more difficult to relate to nature. And when I wrote my book Walking, I thought maybe the people on earth that spend the least time in nature would be people in prisons. But then I learned, at least they have 1 hour every day, outside walking, which again is much more than, for instance, kids in Great Britain. So it is complicated, and I don't have a formula. But again, if you think that average people or let many people spend like 3 or 4 hours every day doing social media and TV, and you live until 80 years old, so that means like around 13 years of your life you will spend looking down into your device, doing something pretty meaningless. I mean, not totally meaningless, but let's say you will be better off doing half an hour than 3 or 4 hours every day. So then again, you spend 13 years of your life kind of, mostly wasting your time. And I think that's one reason why, people complain when you're my age, your age, and, older, they always complain that life is short. And of course, life is short if you're, partly wasting it. But then back again, so to India, but it's, I think 1.4 billion Indians knows better than me. But in general, after visiting around 100 countries, also India a few times, and talked to thousands of people, I think most people underestimate their own possibilities in life.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time in India in the 1990s, and I really was impressed in the education system. There is, they do try and promote nature education and getting the kids out. But I think it's very difficult. I look at my own kids, they have the opportunity to get out every day into nature. And unfortunately, I have to say that if I don't initiate the movement outdoors, they would happily just sit there in front of that screen, playing in a digital environment with their other friends. So yeah, it's a vexed situation.
I think the same with your kids, but it's the same with people in our generations, because the easy solution is to look into your phone. So I think when you get up in the morning, throughout the day, it's so easy to choose the simplest solutions, the easiest things throughout the whole day. And of course, now I'm talking as a Norwegian because this is where I live. But that's a huge mistake to avoid the difficult parts throughout the day. So I think today, after 57 years, I think one of the things I learned from my own life is that you should almost always opt for the most difficult options throughout the day.
Yeah.
So you should listen. You should not listen to all this noise from your phone, binging, ringing, buzzing, expectations about something happening, always being connected, always being someone else, not being yourself. So I think the opposite to all this noise is, of course, silence. And silence has always been difficult for man to relate to, but today it's even more difficult. And that's why that's why silence in general is so much more interesting and enriching than noise.
I think that brings us to something interesting again that we have in common, Erling. The idea of walking, even in India or anywhere on the subcontinent, just that act of getting up and walking out the door and possibly not taking your phone with you takes you out into the environment, whatever that environment is. And we know that once you start walking, it changes the way that you think, and it leaves you more open to the environment outside. So I believe that, making that part of your everyday routine, set aside time to get out for a walk, is a first step to really reconnecting with the world around you.
I absolutely agree. And I also appreciate walking in the cities. I think it's very interesting, just like walking to my office. Nothing fantastic or great is happening, but also always, a few things. And also back to what you said with this walking it's even in our languages, it's in Norwegian, it's in English, you move, you're being moved, motion, emotion. And it's in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is the same. So it kind of, relates to move and gaining knowledge, and also to be moved between your ears. So it's so obvious. So, like Hippocrates said more than 2,000 years ago, that if you feel sick, you should go for a walk. And if you feel, depressed or sick after the first walk, you should go for a second walk.
I think that's great advice. For me, researching my last book, there were so many things that came up in the research that just reinforced my own personal experiences. And really, what it boils down to is, what separates Homo sapiens from all other species on Earth. I mean, there's a few different things, but cognitively, what we have is this incredible problem-solving capability and the ability to tell stories. Now, walking is intimately connected with both of those. When we go for a walk, we change, our brains start to change neurochemically, neuroelectrically, and the flow of neurotransmitters changes. And all of that leads us to a more open and spacious mindset that leads us to be more creative. And when we're more creative, of course, we're able to look at things in different ways. We're able to problem solve. Now, I think especially in this particular time of the pandemic, when people are feeling so compressed, so kind of stacked one on top of the other, it doesn't really matter if you're in Mumbai or in Paris or in New York or in Sydney right now. Everybody is feeling the compressed state of mind that this particular pandemic has put on us. And the way to break out of that is to create space. And, even in these tight lockdown situations, people are allowed to get out for a walk. And by going out for a walk, you will create that internal space. And you'll be able to look at, one of the big problems I think around the pandemic is that people start to ruminate around it. They get into this circular thinking about how bad the pandemic can be, how bad COVID can be. And yes, it can be bad, but we can't dwell on that. We have to look into the future. And the way to break out of that rumination again, one of the simplest ways to break out of that is to get out for a walk. The other thing that walking does for us, of course, is reconnects us with our storytelling capability. And that's linked to events 100,000 years ago when Homo sapiens were still, a small species in East Africa. And right around that time is when humans started to develop this symbolic thought where we could perceive objects for more than what they initially presented as. A good example would be like a cross in Christianity. You look at that cross and, some people would look at that as just two pieces of wood. But people who are steeped in the Christian faith look at that and they see an entire theology embodied in that. That type of thinking only started to develop for Homo sapiens around 100,000 years ago. And at the same time, we started to develop spoken language, verbal language. Prior to that, we communicated mainly through body language. And researchers believe that that idea of spoken language kind of developed out of the complexities that symbolic thought brought for us. So when you combine those two things, symbolic thought and the spoken word, you have the start of storytelling. Now, when you connect that with the fact that Homo sapiens were forced out of East Africa on this cross-continental migration, Homo sapiens ended up wandering the globe for over 70,000 years. And then you realize that the number one narrative structure around the world is the journey narrative. You know, when we think about Joseph Campbell and his hero's journey, that's of course a journey narrative, and you can throw any other narrative structure on top of that, the love story, the rags to riches, a comedy, all of that can be incorporated into a journey narrative. And of course, the reason that that particular narrative structure is so important to us is because it's the story of us. It's the story of Homo sapiens. It's the story of us moving out across the globe, facing obstacles, overcoming obstacles, learning from those challenges, incorporating that wisdom within us, achieving our physical and psychological goals, and then coming back out of that spiral and conveying that wisdom to our local community. Now, that's a very complex way of saying that walking and storytelling are intimately linked. And when we go for a walk, we reconnect with our storytelling self. And of course, it's really important to remember that, you know, nobody frames their lives as a spreadsheet or a set of numbers. Everybody frames their life as a story. Erling, you've got a great story. I've got a decent story. Everybody has a good story, but we all have a start and we all have some potential end. And in between, we have all of these challenges and obstacles that we overcome that we can learn from and convey out to the people who are interested in it. Like you said earlier, you know, you realize that your expeditions were actually a way for other people to understand themselves in some small way. That's incredible. You know, that's physical storytelling right there. And when we all go for a walk, when anybody goes for a walk, they reconnect with that, the storytelling self. And what that does, in my mind, is that it makes people more confident. When you realize where your roots are, when you realize who you are as a person, of course you're going to be more confident. And that's exactly what we need at this time, in this time of compression and ruminating thought. You know, we need creativity, we need problem solving, and we need to reconnect with the story of who we are. So the point of that story is get out for a walk.
Well, good moral. Thanks. Interesting. Thanks for, you know, interesting words. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's you know, also the basic of walking is that it's free. So you know, almost anyone can do it. And so it's, you know, in that sense it's democratic. And I've, you know, interestingly, when I wrote my book on walking, you know, I also, you know, got hold of this guy in a wheelchair and asked him, you know, how he felt when he was not able to walk. And he said that, you know, by moving in the wheelchair and, you know, using his arms, moving around in the streets, etc., he said, you know, he also kind of got the same feeling as he thought we are having, in the sense that he's moving around, he's seeing things are happening in his mind, you get a bit tired, because I think it's important also to get physical tired, because then you get your thresholds down and you take more impressions in. And so I think, you know, it's kind of the basic of life. And it's, you know, it's kind of, when I did research on my book on walking, I also understood that Homo sapiens, of course, did not invent the possibility to walk on two legs, but it was the other way around, that the possibility to walk on two legs invented Homo sapiens. So we have always been a walking species. And walking, doing something physical, has always been the basics of for almost any invention in the history of the world. And now today we see that we kind of the first generation kind of almost has stopped walking. And we believe that we can explore by sitting in a chair, looking into a screen, and that's the way forward. And I mean, I'm not anti-technology, but like, we are species defined by walking, and if we stop walking or almost stop walking, we are different species.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I find it quite concerning, because I know that with my kids, for example, when I try and get my kids out for a walk, and we try and do that every day, our best conversations are always when we're out for a walk. Like you said, there's something important about getting tired, feeling tired. It drops barriers, it opens people up. It lets people communicate in a different way. And there was some interesting research that I came across just a couple of months ago about empathy and walking, because the part of the brain that deals with empathy is also the part of the brain that deals with proprioception. Proprioception is the idea of understanding where you are in your environment. And that part of the brain is called the supramarginal gyrus. And when you start walking, of course, you need to know where you are in your environment. You need to have that feeling. So the supramarginal gyrus starts to fire up, but that's also the part of the brain that makes you empathetic. It makes you more understanding of people. And so when you go for a walk with other people, you actually become more empathetic towards them. And that was just mind-blowing to me, because so much of my research had been based around the individual walking and how it changes our mindset. But when you go walking as a group with one or more people, you actually become more open to them, and the conversation is going to be more open and probably more fulfilling in the end. And I thought that was really interesting because, of course, one of the big movements in business right now is walking meetings. And that means, it means that if you go for a walk, it is, of course, because I do this with my teams at work. We go for a walk, we have a talk. The type of conversations that we have are completely different than if we're sitting around the table looking at each other in the eye. It's much more open, it's much more engaged. So I think that's the reason why that when I'm out with my kids, we actually have such great conversations. So again, more reasons to get out there. But saying that, I have the same issue as you, Erling. Looking at my kids, looking at the screen, it's difficult to imagine where we will be as a species if we stop moving, if we reduce that movement until the point where we don't feel that movement through space. The other interesting thing about that movement through space is that a lot of people don't realize, but actually our conception of time is related to how we move through space. Of course, up until a couple of hundred years ago, people didn't look at their watch or their smartphone to tell what time it is. They gauge time by distance. It'll take me X amount of time, felt time, to get from point A to point B. So that idea of moving through space is deeply coded in us for our conception of time. It's not some kind of a luck that 1 second actually equals 1 step through space. It was actually planned back with the Greeks. And so when you go for a walk, it actually changes your perception of time. And again, if when you get stressed, when you get that compressed feeling, you get that rumination happening, when you go out for a walk, it resets your body's conception of time and makes you again more open and feeling around it.
Yeah. Just add to that. I think it's also like, I think walking in Norway is culturally different than walking in New Delhi. When in the sense that in Norway now we see that privileged people, they keep on walking. They understand the value of it, and less privileged people, they tend to walk less and less. And that again turns into also kind of a democratic problem, because I think if you're going to have a well-run democratic country, people need to see each other, and you need to see your fellow Norwegians if you're going to respect them. But in India, like when I wrote my book, like I looked to New Delhi, and of course it's the opposite problem in the sense that privileged people, they hardly walk. I read about these super rich people who's kind of transported across the city with a helicopter, while of course poor people, they have to walk to work and maybe take a bus for a while, but then need to so it's kind of the other way around, and then kind of probably some cars passing in high speed with more privileged people. So so there again you have a democratic problem, like these people who's sitting in the cars or just flying a helicopter, whatever they do, they don't see their fellow Indians, and that again makes it easier emotionally, not to care about them. So, in that sense, also walking is very important. And I think today, when everything is in the world is about speeding up, like the government would like you to speed up, business would like to speed up, the school system would like you to speed up. So then eventually to walk is some of the most radical thing you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember reading Rebecca Solnit's book 20 years ago or so, Wanderlust, and she just hit it bang on. I mean, walking is actually a political act, especially in North America, where she was writing that, where the motor vehicle has taken over and made it very difficult for people to walk, especially in urban environments. And I think that's another reason why we should be encouraging it more, because it is a political act. It's showing that we want to reclaim that space for humanity and not for machinery. I think, but that leads us into another area, Erling, and that's silence. Another area that you're an expert in, and that I've a little bit of experience in. And again, when we think of India, it's interesting for me because, of course, the idea of meditation, and yoga and pranayama, breathing exercises, of course, these all originate in India, and these are ways to gain that personal silence. So there's an incredibly long history on the subcontinent around that. But now when I go to Delhi or Mumbai, it's not a particularly quiet environment. It is go, 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 vehicles everywhere, buses, trains, people moving, constantly on the go. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations about how people can find that silence that they need to reconnect with themselves?
I think, again, people are underestimating themselves in general in terms also about silence. And I think it's, you can't always wait for silence to come to you. I think, to a great extent, as I said, if you live in Bombay, you need to invent your own silence. And of course, your silence will be different from my silence, because in the silence, you're listening to yourself. I'm thinking about this inner silence. Of course, you can have noise all around you, but you need to find some inner silence, and that silence is within all the time, waiting for it, to be explored. That you can do, when you take a shower in the morning. If you do, at least when you wake up in the morning, when you walk to the metro or walk to the office, When you walk the stairs, you will find inner silence. You find inner silence when you cook. You find inner silence, hopefully, when you make love. And then again, some inner silence maybe if you do a walk. So I think, the silence is there all the time, waiting for you. And it's not about turning the back to the world to listen to yourself. It's more the opposite in my experience. That if you relate to silence, you see the world in a different way, and you start to love life, your own and others, even more.
And I think it's important to point out, of course, that I don't think either of us are talking about physically silent space. You can find silence inside, even for example in the office at work. I take that time to find that space. Before and after meetings, for example. I want to be centered before I have an in-depth conversation with someone. So I would actually, go for a short walk on my own. It might be noisy all around me, but just finding that personal interior space opens me up, and again, makes me more accessible to the people who want to talk to me. So I think no matter where you are, you can find that personal space. Again, it's like with walking, it's a question of mindset, isn't it? It's a question of dedicating that time to it, learning techniques where it's simple to get into that space, and then applying it on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And of course, I think it's interesting what you said about breathing and Indian cultures, because sometimes to find it in a silence too, at least me, I need to breathe in a slightly different way, and then kind of close out the rest of the world, and just maybe for a few minutes or hopefully more, like they find this inner silence. And I think just like an apropos to what you said about walking with your kids, and then eventually you talk together and you close each other, and you become more creative. And of course, as we both know, the reason Socrates was walking all the time was not because he was an athlete. It was because, it made him think. And also with Steve Jobs, he kept on walking. And that's where, he got his bright ideas. And that doesn't mean that we turn into Steve Jobs if we walk, but, it's a good start.
Well, actually, the start is wherever you are. Steve Jobs had a lot of things going on in his mind, as did Socrates, as did, Bill Gates walks every day when he's thinking. Darwin did exactly the same thing with his sand tracking tent. They all had particular problems that they were thinking about leading up to the process of walking. But the point there for me is that everybody has those problems. They might be a relationship problem, a problem at home, a problem at work. Just getting out for a walk, finding that spaciousness inside will give you different ways to view the problem, which is what we need. It's about divergent thinking, getting lots of different ways of looking at a particular issue. You may not find the answer. I always get lots of ideas when I'm out for a walk or a run every day, but maybe none of them will stick. But very often I find that things do click. So when you have trust in the process of walking, then, I always tell people, magic happens every day when you make it happen.
Yeah. Miracles are happening all the time, but we don't see them, or we forget.
That's right.
The thing is, when I walk, I can walk from my home into the forest back up north here. And, when I walk into the forest, everybody, who's coming back from a walk, coming towards me, they all look happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say that to people, have you ever been on a walk where you felt worse at the end than you did at the start? And, people can't find one of those situations. It's a magic pill, walking when you get down to it. You know, if some pharmaceutical company could generate all the benefits that walking can produce for us and plug it into a little pill, it would be $1 trillion product. And the fact of the matter is, fortunately, walking will always be free. Like you said, Erling, you just got to get out the door. That's the magic. That's where the magic starts, getting out the door.
Yeah, I heard this great story from northern Canada, Northwest Territories, with the Inuit country on Baffin Island, I think it was. Like if you're super angry, very, very mad, you're asked to walk in one direction out of the village. And eventually, when you calm down, you're not that angry anymore after walking the same direction for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 1 hour. Then you put a stick down into the ground, and then somehow you have measured how angry you have been. So you fall down, and then you can walk back again.
Oh, that is brilliant. I love that.
You know, you never know, all those stories are true, but this one totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Just true.
But I love the brilliance of measuring your anger, measuring your anger again in distance walk. That's fantastic.
Exactly. And it's, it's the best for everybody, because, if a person is mad, it's useless to talk to the person anyway. And for the person to, just get madder by talking to you. So, go on that walk. It's the best for everybody.
Yeah. Again, divergent thinking right there. Okay, now I'm getting some messages that we gotta move on a bit here. We've got a few questions coming in on the chat, so we got a question for me here. So why did you walk in the Himalayas, and what did walking there do for you? So as we were saying at the start there, I think the first reasons why I decided to do that very, very long walk in the Himalayas was selfish. It was about me, myself, and I. But the incredible thing was that when I was engaged with that, when I was walking through the mountains, incredible things happened every day. Magic happened every day. And at the end of the walk, I wanted to write a book about it, and I sat down, and I remember I was actually in Dharamsala in Himachal Pradesh, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama lives. And I sat there and I wrote up the draft of this book, and it took me about 3 months. And I put it aside. I finished the draft, and I went off, and true Irish spirit, I had a few beers to celebrate, and a couple of days later I came back to read through that manuscript and went through it, and I started reading, and I realized that it was a piece of shit, and no one was going to publish that, and no one was going to read it. And that was incredibly frustrating for me, because I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories. That's my background in Ireland. And as I said, magic happened every day. So I went through this very, very long process of trying to understand why it was that the magic had happened every day on that walk. And at first I thought it was about the landscape, because the landscape is so incredibly dramatic. So I did an incredible amount of research about the flora and the fauna and the geology and the geography, on and on and on. Wrote another draft, wasn't working. So I thought, okay, well, it must be the culture. So I did another draft incorporating the culture, the Islamic culture, the Buddhist culture, the Hindu culture. Still wasn't finding that magic. Another draft looking specifically at those religions and the religious landscape. And then, by this point, I was 10 years into this project, and I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere on it. And I was in Kathmandu then, and I gave the draft of that book to a friend of mine, an editor there, and she went through it. And I remember she called me up and said, "Let's go have dinner, and we'll talk about the manuscript." And we sat down, and she started talking about it, and she pulled up 10 pages of notes, and I thought, wow, she's been really thorough on this. And I realized it was 10 pages of notes on the first pages of the manuscript. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to go on a long time. but you know, our conversation led to the fact that she thought that there was a lot going on in the book, but I hadn't really gotten to the heart of what the story was. And, you know, I kind of looked at her and, you know, thought, well, you know, she doesn't understand that this is my walk about, you know, my Himalayas and my headspace. And, but about 3 days after that, I was sitting in my hotel room in Kathmandu, and I'd just been editing in a section of the book where I reached the source of the Ganges, an area called Galmukh, which of course everybody in India will know. And that was just an incredible moment, because I was arriving at the source of the Ganga just as the sun set, and people who've been up in that area know that the river emanates from the base of the glacier there. And as the sun was coming down, the sky was going through those incredible fiery shades, you know, through ruby and copper and eventually to coral. So the sky was the color of coral, and the face of the glacier was that kind of an aquamarine turquoise color that glacial ice gets in particular light. And I realized that turquoise and coral they're the protective stones that every Tibetan child receives when they're born. They're protective stones. And so I felt like I was moving into this protective environment. And I got to the source of the river just as the sun was going down, and I sat down on this little gray sand beach by the glacial cave and just wanted to be still, you know. I wanted to find that silence, Erling. And the river was coming out, and it's a fully formed river, and it was dancing there. And I was alone on this very cold, cold beach at 4,500 meters. And I remember feeling this energy, this heat rising up my spine. And I realized that I was crying. And I'd always attributed those tears to the fact that I was in this incredible piece of religious landscape at the source of the most powerful river of Hinduism. But then years later in that hotel room, when I'd been editing that section of the book, and in my writing process, I do quite a bit of meditation. So I'd been meditating on that section, and I was coming out of the meditation, and I had this incredible sense of deja vu. I'd been there before. I had been to that feeling, you know, this cool chill that you have around a glacier, this particular half light. And all of a sudden it hit me that the last time that I'd been in that particular situation was when I had seen my brother's body dead in a hospital morgue in Canada. My little brother Gareth had died in a tragic boating accident when he was 18. And I remember going to the morgue to see his body. And that was, of course, one of the most important moments in my life. And I realized, of course, then that what the walk through the Himalayas had been about was not about me being the first person to do this or that. It was about me trying to come to terms with the death of my brother. It was the universal story that we all have to face in this life, which is learning to accept the passing of a loved one. And when I realized that this story, this book, was all about the relationship between mountains, myself, my brother, grief, and the passing, then I was able to go back and rewrite the book completely. And I realized that so many of those magical moments that I was experiencing in the Himalayas, between myself and landscape and myself and people and myself and religion, all that stuff that I'd been writing about actually had connections back to experiences that I'd had with my little brother. So the walking, I always say that the walking was the key to me unlocking that grief. Because as Erling and I were talking about, you know, walking gives you this creative space. It gets you out of that rumination that you drop into when you're face on with a particular problem, whether that be COVID, whether that be the death of a loved one, whether that be, another tragedy in the family. Walking gives you that ability to break out of that. And, in the Indian context, I always say that walk in the Himalayas, almost 5 months on my own, was actually a very long darshan with Gareth. Because, of course, when you go to the temple in Hinduism and you have darshan with the statues there or with the Brahmin, you're able to look at these objects from as many different angles as possible, and you can see them in new lights. And that's what was actually happening with me and Gareth on that very long walk. I was able to look at him in all different types of contexts and realize that what he had given me was something incredibly special, and that was to refine in a way what Erling and I were talking about earlier, which is the explorer that's in all of us, the ability to go out and break out of those molds and find yourself in new spaces. So in the end, what that walk in the Himalayas was all about was pilgrimage to the self.
I think every walk is a pilgrimage.
Yeah. You have the mindset. You have to have the mindset, though.
There's a kind of degrees of pilgrimages. Just one little apropos to the beginning of your answer. You said again, it was totally selfish. I think a better word is egocentric, in the sense that selfish is only a very negative word. But I don't think that, that drive is only negative, because it could also be, for the better. And so egocentric, I think, is a better word. Selfish and egoistic are just negative words.
Good point. No, that's a good point, Erling, because I think you're absolutely right. Because when you challenge yourself like that, then, you're going to break new ground, which is what we should be doing as human beings. We should be challenging ourselves as much as possible. Now, I think we're running out of time here. I see that we're down to about 2 minutes to go. Erling, do you have any comments, thoughts before we leave?
I really hope that this festival be, next year, that we can go meet together. Yes, but I think, again, at least I hope, you walks, my walks, it's no reason for people to copy our walks, although many people can do it physically, and time-wise. But I think the most important, message is that, everybody need to find their own path. Like they say, Sanskrit, swamarga, you need to find your own path. You need to find your own self pole. And if you say it's impossible and I say it's possible, we're probably both right.
Yeah. I think that's about it. I'd like to personally thank the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival for having me here. I mean, what an absolute honor and a pleasure to be able to talk to Erling. Read all his books, and now we've had a great conversation, so that was just fantastic. And as Erling said, let's hope that that this pandemic, runs its course, and we'll be able to get back to India, back to the Himalayas. And, someday I would love to actually be in Kasauli for the festival. So thank you so much.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you for inviting. And thank you for listening. And thank you, Jono.
Thank you, both of you. That was, I actually hesitate to say anything because I don't want to break the silence that this leaves us with, the silence of a sense of the importance of the philosophical importance, I think, of really investigating who we are as human beings on this earth and what the meaning is of finding ourselves and searching for ourselves, Thank you for those beautiful stories. Thank you for connecting walking with storytelling. I just had a story that I wrote that came out in fact, a climate change anthology. So I very much relate to the idea that you have to tell stories in order to document our lives, to measure who we are, and to understand our place in this universe. It really was a pilgrimage for us too, this conversation. So thank you, both of you, for bringing it to us. Hopefully soon.
And thank you for inviting.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jono, for great talk. Thank you. See you in Norway.
Yeah.
We're talking in my life.